All right, time to get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Herschell Carrousel Factory Museum's first Carousel Chat. I'm Marissa Sieb, and I'm the Education Coordinator at the museum. Carousel Chats are a free virtual program series made possible by the Museum Association of New York Building Capacity Grant. Today, Bill Brown of Balboa Park Carousel and Dean and Ron from the Herschell Carrousel Factory Museum will be discussing how to maintain historic carousels. After the two presentations, there will be a question and answer session, so please be sure to leave any questions in the chat below. And I will now turn it over to Bill for our first presentation.
Hi everyone, this is Bill Brown from the Balboa Park Carousel in San Diego, California. The Balboa Park Carousel is a Herschel Spillman 1910 menagerie carousel. It's a 3-row carousel. It's got 2 rows of jumpers and an outer row of standers. If we can go to the next slide, please, we can take a better look at it. Okay, there we go. So everything you see here is original to this carousel, built in 1910. Everything you see here is original, with the exception of 4 small Allen Herschel horses, which were added in the early 60s for our younger customers. But everything else, the paintings have never been retouched. Everything you see here, it's still the original paint, and both on the outer rounding boards and the center panels. We still have the military band organ that came with the carousel. We still play the traditional brass ring game. I've got an article, a copy of an article from 1913 that mentions people playing the brass ring game on our carousel. We still have, you have iron rings that you can throw at a dummy, knock it over, and get a brass ring and get a free ride. But everything here is original to this carousel. Now, I've always wondered, I'm going to show you a restoration of one of our animals, our armored horse, and then we'll get to the machinery. But I've always wondered what colors our animals were originally. I know some of you are thinking, well, Bill, just sand down till you get to the colors right before the prime coat, the white primer, and that's your original color. Well, we can't do that with Balboa Park Carousel. There's another gentleman, a guy named Clarence Wilkin, who started in 1922, and he worked for a long period of time, over 40 years. And I've talked to people who worked with him, and they said whenever Clarence was painting an animal, he would take it off the carousel, take it to his yard, and cover it with lye, a powerful chemical, to take all the paint off. They still do that today. The reason is, over the years, the nice carving lines that the carvers put in get filled with paint, and that's an easy way to take the paint off. Unfortunately, it also took off all the original paint, so Clarence would start from scratch. So we can't sand our animals down to find the original colors. So I decided to take a journey to the Herschell Carrousel Factory Museum in 2019 to see if they could clue me in on what the original colors were. And very nice gentleman, the curator of the museum, Doug Bathke, knew that was one of my objectives. And so he took me up to the second floor of the museum where they had their archives. And if we go to the next slide, please. They have an original illustrated Herschel Spillman catalog. And it's got 14 animals in there. And it's really cool. So if we go to the next slide, one of those animals is an armored horse. And it looks almost exactly like our armored horse. There's some slight changes. I'm guessing, Doug can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm guessing this catalog's probably dated probably around 1900, shortly after the company was formed. Our horse was carved in 1910. So everything evolves over time. You know, like automobiles, they change a little bit from year to year. And there's some slight changes in our armored horse. If you look at that band on the lower neck of the horse, just underneath the jewels and above that red cutout, whatever that red stuff is, there's a gold area with a row of orange stars or something. That's slightly different on our horse. It's like chainmail now. And the faceplate is slightly different. The biggest change, though, is the jewels. Most of the jewels on this illustrated horse are orange. That's why they have an orange saddle and orange emblem. Most of the jewels on our horse are purple, so we decided to go with a purple saddle and a purple emblem. So, and this horse appears to be gray, so our horse is gray. We use this as a reference quite a bit in restoring our armored horse. So if we can go to the next slide, I had some help. I had a couple volunteers. That's Sally Hickson on the right. Her mother, Virginia Long, used to own the carousel. In fact, I worked for Sally's mother from 1972 to 1977. We were co-workers. Sally worked in the ticket box, and I started out as someone putting out the ring game and assisting customers. And the carousel is currently owned by an organization, nonprofit organization called Forever Balboa Park. And the lady on the left, her name is Ann Wilson. Is instrumental in raising money both to purchase the carousel from the previous owner and now for the upkeep of the carousel. Now, if you look between their two hands, you can see that band that I was talking about on the illustration. See, it's a little different now. I think that whoever painted it before me didn't get that band right, though. See, it looks like a lot of solid gold circles, right? I've never seen armor that looks like that. I think, this is just my theory, but I think I'm right. I think the original intent of the carvers and the Herschell Spolman painters was that that should be chainmail. I think those should be like little rings, little ringlets. However, if the carver had have carved little rings, they would have been too brittle, right? The edges would probably break off easily. So I think the idea was that the carvers would carve these solid circles, and then it would be up to the painters to turn those into ringlets. I'll show you what we did with it. You can tell me what you think. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, now you see on the lower neck there, see those those little rings? Does that look like chainmail? Doesn't that look like what armor should look like? I've never seen armor with solid circles like that. I think this is what they were going for when they did that. And you see our jewels are mostly purple. So the saddle's purple, the emblem's purple, and the horse in the illustration appeared to be gray, so our horse is gray. The faceplate is a little different. If we could go to the next slide. Yeah, this is the area around the eye, the faceplate. I used a technique called antiquing. A lot of you probably know what that is, but for those who don't, it was invented by furniture makers to make they want to make their furniture look older, hence the name antiquing. I wasn't trying to make the faceplate look older. I just wanted to bring out those depressions that in real life the blacksmith probably made when he was hammering out the faceplate. But what antiquing is, you take one color. First, we painted the faceplate silver. And then you take a darker color, it could be any color. I went with black. You put a black glaze over that, and don't ask me what a glaze is. It looks like paint to me. I think it just doesn't dry as fast as paint, so you can work with it. So we painted the faceplate entirely black, and then you take a stiff cloth called a cheesecloth, and you can wipe as much or as little of the glaze off as you want for whatever effect you're going for. Now I wanted just a subtle, just wanted to leave just a little bit of that black residue in the depressions to bring those out a little more. So that's the way I antique the faceplate. Anyone who paints an animal for a working carousel like this, they want to put several layers of a clear coat over the paint to protect it. After all the work you went to painting it, you want to protect it. So I like to get creative with my clear coat finishes. It's a lot of different types of finishes. There's glossy, there's matte, and there's semi-gloss and satin. So I like to use those finishes in my final coat of clear coat. I use, on this horse here, I used a matte finish on the horse itself, so it wasn't so shiny, a satin finish on the armor, and a gloss finish on the eye. See, that's what brings out that sparkle in his eye, because it's got that glossy finish. Anyway, that's how we restored our armored horse. If you have any questions about that, I'll answer them in the Q&A session. We're going to go to the machinery now. If we could have the next slide. Now, everything we do on the Balboa Park Carousel is the same way they did it in 1910. You see those little brass circles that go all the way around there? Those are called grease cups, and those are original. Those are from 1910. That's just the way they did it. And they're filled with a thick open gear grease. It's not oil, it's a thick grease. It's easy to work with. And the cups screw on, kind of like a lid on a jar. They just screw on. And so as you turn the cup goes down, that forces grease onto the bearing. And there's grease cups all over the Balboa Park Carousel. Everywhere there's a bearing, you'll see a grease cup. Above the animals, above their pole, there's grease cups. Down below, there's more. We'll see those later. But every working morning, the operator goes up and he turns every one of those cups a half turn, and that forces just a little grease onto the bearings there. Isn't this a cool viewpoint, though, from the top? I went to my first National Carousel Association convention a couple months ago, and we saw 7 carousels. It was really cool, but you can only look up from the bottom. They wouldn't let us climb up like this and look at the good stuff on top. So this is This is a treat here, and I think you're going to get to see two carousels from this vantage point. Well, let's talk about a little these shafts that go out. Well, each shaft has its own individual gear, as you can see, and it lies on a bed of upward-facing teeth. Now, that bed of upward teeth doesn't move; it stays stationary. You can see it's bolted to the center pole. But as the carousel is going, those gears move on the top of that bed, and out from every one of those shafts is a pair of jumpers on our carousel. We have 2 rows of jumpers, and that's how the animals go up and down. And okay, let's go to the next slide. Now we still use the original General Electric 10 horsepower motor. That's it on the right where it says motor, and the motor turns the belt, and the belt, I just call it a big wheel on the left there. If there's someone knows a more technical name for it, you can tell me. I just call it big wheel. Its function is to turn that shaft in the center there. And the big wheel and the motor are constantly going all day. They never stop. Let's go to the next slide, and we'll see what's on the other side of the big wheel. Okay, the big wheel would be on the far right. You can't see it. It's on the other side of that wall on the right there. But now we have the clutch. The clutch is that thing with the vertical red stripe on it. Everything to the right of the clutch is always going all day long, never stops. Everything to the left of the clutch, when the clutch is disengaged, when the carousel is stopped, there's a shaft to the left of the clutch that doesn't move. See those 2 gears on the left? There's a big gear and a little gear. That little gear, when the clutch is engaged, that little gear is going as fast as the big wheel. We still start and stop the carousel the same way they did in 1910. There's nothing automatic here. You don't push a button. The operator, it's a skill. If you pull that clutch or brake in too fast, you can do some serious damage to the carousel. So it's a skill that has to be learned. So when the operator is starting the carousel, he slowly pulls that clutch in, and what that does is that matches the speed of that little gear with the speed of the big wheel. It's a pressure thing. It just kind of puts them together. That clutch is kind of an intermediary between the 2 sides. And so when the carousel is full speed, when the clutch is all the way in, that little gear is going as fast as the big wheel, and that's pretty fast. So if the carousel was going that fast, everybody would fly off. So that's why you have that big gear there. The big gear not only makes everything go vertical, but it slows everything down. It's called a differential gear. It's going to make things go at a different speed. So, because it takes longer for that big gear to get around than that speedy little gear. So that slows everything down to more manageable speed. And check it out, we got grease cups down here. We can see 3.5. There's actually 6 down here. Yeah, if you look down from that one on the right, you'll see half a grease cup. But these grease cups get turned a half a turn every half hour. So that's how important they felt these 6 places where the cups are. There's one more, there's a couple that we can't see. There's one more farther to the right, just before the big wheel. And there's one, if you go up that drive shaft a little further, you'll see another one. But anyway, they get filled every morning because they get turned a half turn every half hour. So by the end of the day, they're empty. So the next working day, they have to be filled again. So that's how we grease our carousel the way they did then. So, okay, let's see the next slide. Okay, here's a wider view. Okay, you can see the top of the big wheel on the right, and there's the clutch. Okay, when the operator's starting the ride, he slowly pulls that clutch in. Like I said, once it's full speed, that clutch locks into place. And the next task the operator has is to turn over a 3-minute egg timer, that egg timer at the top of the photo. We still time everything the way they did in 1910. So once you get 3 minutes at full speed, once the carousel's up to speed, the operator turns over the egg timer, and how long it takes to get up to speed varies depending on how heavy the carousel is. If there's a lot of people on the carousel, if it's a full carousel, it takes a little longer than if you just have a few people on the carousel. It takes between a minute and a minute and a half to get up to speed, depending. Once the timer is empty, once the sand runs out, he disengages the clutch and applies the brake. And it takes about 30 seconds to stop. So from start to stop, it's between a 4.5 and 5 minute ride. So I get a lot of comments. One of the comments I get the most, boy, you guys give a nice long ride. And that's because we time it the same way they did in 1910. Okay, we talked about the clutch. Let's talk about the brake a little. The lever on the right controls the clutch. The lever on the left controls the brake. So if you go down where it says brake, follow that arrow down. At the tip of the arrow, that's on the drum. That's on the brake drum. Now the drum is always, when the carousel is moving, the drum is moving. It's rotating also. Now, if you go to the right of that, you'll see a sleeve that goes around that drum, and it's controlled by the lever. There's a rod going from the lower part of the lever to the far side of that sleeve. So when the when the operator pulls the brake in from left to right, it tightens that sleeve around the drum, and that's what slows down and stops the carousel. Okay, we've talked about our differential gears. That's the drive shaft going up from the differential gear. If we could see just a little farther, which we can't, we'd see another grease step. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, now you're just gonna have to trust me, you can't see it, but at the top of that drive shaft, there's another gear. You can't see it because all that lumber on all that wood on the right is obscuring it, but it goes up right where that wood on the right is. And this gear at the top of the drive shaft locks in with that big ring gear there. And the ring gear is attached to the carousel, so when the drive shaft gear is moving, it makes the ring gear go, and that's what makes our carousel move. You just saw it from the beginning where the motor is to the end where the ring gear is. Okay, that's how that works. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, did you ever wonder how the lights on a carousel get their electricity? I mean, how do they do that? Do they have like a super long extension cord or something? No, there's copper bands. They're attached to the center pole. They don't move. They're fixed on the center pole. But there's these carbon brushes on the right there, and they do move with the carousel. They go around and they stay in contact with those bands. So electricity goes from the bands to the brushes and then gets distributed out to the lights. And that's how most carousels get the electricity to their lights. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this is one of my favorite photos. I call this the vertigo photo. Every working morning, the operator has to climb 2 ladders to the very top of the center pole because at the top of the center pole is probably the most important single piece of machinery on the carousel. It's the main bearing. That's what the entire carousel hangs from. And it's very important to take care of that main bearing, everyone who maintains carousels. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, and the way Herschell does it, and I've seen a couple of different Denso carousels. I've also seen containers like this on Densos, but different manufacturers probably have different ways to do it. But the main thing is keep that main bearing lubricated. Now, the way this works is every morning you take an empty cup of clean oil up and you put it in that container, and all during the day, every 10 seconds, a drop of oil drips onto the main bearing. And you look through that little window below the oil, and you can actually see a drop just getting ready to drip there. And it should drip every 10 seconds. However, because of weather, different temperatures, that drop, the rate of drip can change. Like on a slow day, the oil is sluggish and it drips slower. On a hot day, it drips faster. And it has to be compensated for because it has to drip every 10 seconds. So that's what that knob on top is for. See that groove knob? Say I go up on a hot day and it's dripping every 7 seconds. That's too fast. At that rate, the container might go empty before the day is over, and the bearing would be running dry, and the bearing would get damaged. So use that knob to compensate for that. I can turn that knob clockwise a click or two and get that drip going every 10 seconds. So every day you got to check that drip, make sure it's 10 seconds. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so like I said, it goes up with this cup of clean oil, and you put it in the container, and then you take, and so now you have an empty cup. You want to drain the old oil from the previous day. So you put that empty cup under a spigot. It's a little hard to see with all these cables and things, but if you look at the lower half of the photo, you go just to the left of the center pole, you'll see a metal tube going down, and it's got like a horizontal shutoff lever there, and then a little more tube. So what the operator then does after he's put his clean oil in, he has an empty cup. He puts his empty cup under the spigot, flips that horizontal lever up, and drains the old oil from the previous day out. But one day in 2008, I was draining the old oil, and I noticed that there were metal shavings coming out with the old oil. And all the years I've been doing this, I'd never seen any metal shavings come out with the old oil before, so I knew that wasn't good. And I showed the owner, and he called up who probably was at that time the foremost expert on repairing old carousels, probably in the country, certainly in the West. He would maintain all the big carousels on the West, Disneyland, Knott's Berry Farm. Probably those of you who are familiar with carousels might recognize his name. It's Dan Hornberger. Sadly, he's no longer with us, but he would go all over the country repairing carousels. But he and his crew were based in Los Angeles. And so he came down to San Diego, and we showed him the metal shavings, and he said, oh man, you need a new main bearing. And our main bearing did last almost 100 years, from 1910 to 2008. It lasted 98 years. And that's pretty good considering the entire way the carousel rides on this thing. And it's because we kept it lubricated all that time. But this is a huge job because there's the main bearing is in two halves, and the entire carousel is attached to the upper half of the bearing. And as most of you know, the carousel is suspended by these cables. You can see a few of them here attached to the bearing. I get this question a lot from customers. Is there a track underneath the carousel that it rides on? No, there's no track. It's all suspended from the top and suspended by these cables. And now the only way to get to the main bearing is to remove these cables. So how are we going to hold up the carousel? Well, Dan and his crew brought down a whole bunch of 4x4s, and every sweep going outward that holds the animals got a pair of 4x4s, one on the inside and one on the outside. So by the time they were finished, there was like a forest of vertical 4x4s holding the carousel up. And then they were able to remove the cables and get to that main bearing. So they took the old bearing off and they took it somewhere and got new rollers and had it resurfaced and brought it back. Let's go to the next slide. We're going to look at the bottom half of the main bearing. This is a treat. I mean, most people only get to see this every 100 years. This is the inside of the main bearing. Normally, you can't see it because it's in, you got the cables going to it. So this is the bottom half of the bearing. The bottom half remains fixed on the top of the center pole. However, those rollers rotate. The top half is flat. And so the top half of the bearing and the entire carousel rotate on these rollers. So these got to be like Hercules rollers. They're holding up who knows how many tons. I don't know how many tons our carousel weighs, but that's how much weight is on top of these rollers. And I got to see the old rollers. They look just like these, only they were getting pitted. Any little thing, any old oil or anything gets in between those rollers and the flat surface on top of them, it just gets ground into there. So not only that, the inside of the rollers were starting to deteriorate. That's probably what I was seeing when I was seeing these metal shavings coming out. So let's look at the next slide, please. We'll see the top half. Okay, so now those upward hook things, that's still our original carousel. The new part is that shiny circular part. They put a new surface on there. So the entire carousel gets attached to the way it works is there's a circular cable that goes in those upward facing hooks. And then the cables that hold the carousel up, they go in between the hooks, in those gaps there, and they attach to the circular cable. So that's the way that works. The flat part goes on the rollers, and the flat part and the entire carousel rotate on those rollers. And that's a look at the main bearing. That's a cool look. Yeah. Okay, that's the end of my presentation. If you have any questions about the restoration of the armored horse or the main bearing, I'd be happy to answer them later in our Q&A session. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much, Bill. And as he said, if you have any questions, just drop them into the chat below. And now Ron and Dean are going to present for the Herschell Carrousel Factory Museum.
Oh, there we are. All right, this is Ron. I'm Dean. I've been here 6 years. Ron's been here 3, 4,
Starting
5. Time flies when you're having fun. It's mainly our job to maintain our 1916 Herschel #1 special. We have 36 horses, and they're all jumpers in 3 rows. The carousel is a bit of a split. I'm told the 2 insides were 1906, and then in 1916, the 3rd row was added to the outside. But Ron he's the expert and the maintenance guy. I get greasy and hand him tools, and we try to do what we can to keep this thing running. So we'll try to show you some of the parts of it. The reason you see the white in the front is 2 of our rounding boards are off right now because our restoration team is in the process of refinishing them. Next slide.
Okay, I'm going to start out. This is going to be interesting because it's going to be different. We're going to show some of the exact same parts, but we had some restoration done on this and modernization. This is a grease that we use and on all, whether it's the grease caps, whether it's the bearings, whether it's the ring and pinion gears, we use a waterproof green grease. We don't necessarily need to have waterproof, but we use this for some rides on the outside also. This has a good viscosity or stickiness to it, and it hangs onto the gears quite well. So that's the type of grease that we use.
Since we went to using this grease, we found a lot less grease dripping on people when it on nice hot sunny days when the temperature in the roundhouse gets high. We've just found this to be a good grease to use.
Next slide, please. This is the very top of the center pole that Bill was talking about. We don't have an oil cup or oil drip as you were seeing before. We have to grease ours, and as Bill said, this is a very important bearing up here, and it must be taken care of. We'll show you later on some of the things we have on how we kind of know when to do this, other than just by sight. But this is your upper pole. This is how we grease the upper bearing. Next slide, please. I don't know how this ain't okay.
This is very similar to Bill's, except that in our case where he had the grease cups in the middle, our bearings had been either changed, replaced, or reseated, but they're grease fittings on each cap. So we're able to, again, just pump grease into it with a grease gun. You can see the caps on each side.
Now this, as Bill was saying, as you see all these shafts going out, this is the same thing that makes our horses go up and down. It's like a crankshaft, but you'll notice that the center ring gear is what cracked on ours. So these have all been replaced. So this is kind of completely new as compared to what you've seen before. These are pillow block bearings that you see that holding that shaft coming out. You'll see on your upper right-hand side, there's a connection up there on the upper part going out. That's original. Coming in towards the gear is what has been replaced. So it's just an upper view showing how we have modernized because of breakage on our carousel. Next slide. This is just a close-up. The one thing that we do is, as Dean was saying earlier, you'll notice that the Zerk fittings, they have a cover on them. And that is just for safety purposes. We don't want anything dropping on the Zerk fittings if anything were to happen to get up there. And it doesn't hurt anything at all to keep them covered. You'll also see on your gears how they're offset. That makes it possible for the size of the gear there and to get all of your pinion gears in such a small place. Next slide, please. This is kind of the same thing. Again, we're showing the caps on it, and it's just another, you'll see the amount of grease that's on there. You'll see how it's a green grease, and it hangs on good. It just doesn't fall off all the time. So you can see how it hangs on pretty good. Next slide, please. This is our electrical pickups. Bill explained exactly how it is. It runs the lights on it. What we do once occasionally though is there's a copper bar running around there. We will take a real fine emery cloth or
bronze wool.
Wool.
You don't want to use steel wool because it's magnetic. It rusts.
Right. So,
it's electrical conductive, but we have some bronze wool that we use to clean those.
So we clean them off, and not that often because the brushes on that really don't deposit too much, but I think we've done it once in the last 3 years. So, but it doesn't hurt to keep checking your brushes up there all the time, and you keep your contacts clean. Next. This shows our center bearing on our pole. This is another second, the very top bearing on the pole and this center one are probably, like Bill said, your two main bearings. The other ones are small ones. They can be replaced pretty easy. This cannot be replaced very easy. It would take a major tear down, as a matter of fact. So this is important. We have 4 grease fittings every 90 degrees on this one. And that's part of our regular, on a regular time period that we take care of this. We'll show some more on the next slide, please. The main thing for here is I just want to show the Zerk fitting up on top, upper left there, but you'll notice you can actually see grease coming out of that bearing. Because of these type bearings, you will see grease coming out. And if you don't see grease coming out, if you have this type of bearing, you better put some grease in it because you need to see that coming out. And not so much to the point that it's falling down on the ground, but you need to see when you're greasing it, a little bit of movement on that. That's knowing that you're getting the proper amount of grease in there. Next slide, please. This shows your gearbox in main drive off of the bottom motor, and we have a motor and gearbox. We'll get to that later. But this is just up above inside. It shows your ring, your 2 gears, and that's that. Again, I show the grease fitting there only because we're more into telling you about how we maintain it rather than exactly what it is. But again, that gearbox there is very important, and it's tough sometimes to see that Zerk fitting up there. So, but that gearbox has to have grease on a regular basis.
And then also periodically in our maintenance, we'll go up there and very slowly move the carousel and grease the drive gear and grease the ring gear with a paintbrush, and either re-spread the grease, or if it's short grease, we'll add grease to it to keep that both clean and lubricated so everything runs.
And again, the type of grease that we use hangs on up there. And there's the grease they used in 1916 was certainly a whole lot different than this.
Yeah.
So, but we just find it an advantage that I can put a brush on that, put some grease on that, and you can run that and stop it, and you can actually see grease still where it was contact, metal to metal, and it's still sticky on there. So that's how good that stuff hangs onto that. Next slide, please. This is just a close up of the exact same thing. And you can see where you've got grease on it. You can actually see some fresh grease that, and I hadn't greased it from that, but up here on the right-hand side, a couple of those teeth, you can see some of that green grease on it. I mean, it just hangs on good. So, but again, that's just a close up of that drive system there. Next, please. This is a side view of a hanger. This does not have any grease fittings on it. You can see where the brass bowl comes up and there's a cup there. Originally, these things were made the same thing as Bill was talking about on top. They had oilers to take care of these, and they were pretty dirty. And so what we do is I hand grease these. And can we next photo? I'll show you a little bit. Next slide. Okay, this is a front view of our saddle. I mean, of our hanger. You can see on the outside parts a kind of a ring of grease around there. Up on the upper bar to the outside shaft, there's a little grease on there. What happens is there's no bearing there. It's just metal on metal, basically. And so when you put grease up in that, it has a tendency of working through the open spot. And so it works out. So what I do is that works out. I have a 1-inch putty knife I take. I will take that grease off of there. It's good grease. Put it back inside. Now, when that grease is not working out, I know it's time to add some more grease. And not only that, I can look up in there and I can kind of tell. I've been doing this long enough. You can almost by sight, I know. But there's still, if that grease is not working its way out, you don't have enough grease in it. So that, and again, you see how nice that's sticking there? That's that same type grease. It's dark only because of it. That's what happens when it works.
Been up there for a while.
So Next slide, please. This is the saddle. This is where your crankshaft or whatever what makes the animals go up and down. This is what sets on top of there. You'll notice it's an open bearing and it's a Babbitt bearing. So it just sets on top. You can see the grease that's in there. That pin up on top is not original. That was New York State Inspection Safety. They made us put a pin in there so that it doesn't come out. I don't know how it ever would, but you know, you have to satisfy your state inspectors, which we have these inspected once a year. All the rest of the rides out in the outside are inspected once a year. And those are the people you must keep happy. Yes. But there's 2 saddles on each hanger. And then of course there's 3 horses on each row. So there's 3 hangers. So there's a total of 5 spots to grease on each one of those. And naturally that's all by hand. There's no Zerk fittings, there's nothing. So
No cheating. We have to get up there and do it.
Next slide, please. One thing I like to mention is that this is just a picture of a turnbuckle. I inspect these all the time just so the nuts don't loosen up. This kind of holds everything in place. It comes from the top, all the way from the top to the holding it up. You also have cross ties on it. On the lower part, I'll be truthful with you, I've never had one loosen up, but I check them all the time. You don't want one of those to be breaking loose, and they won't tighten, but they certainly could loosen up, and that could cause a sag, and that could cause part of your platform to sag lower. So it's still a good idea to check those, make sure that they're staying where they should be. It's a good idea to I do it like 2 to 3 times a year. In the wintertime, we don't get very much usage. So, but maybe in spring, middle of the summer, and then in the fall, I'll go around and check those just to make sure that they're not. And of course, all the ones down on the bottom, you're looking at all the time. So I go by and I just shake it. And that's how I can test everything. You just shake it a little bit and you know whether they're getting loose or not. Next slide, please. Okay, this just shows 2 of our volunteers. On the right-hand side is Dean and one of our other volunteers, and they're working on the bottom of a horse. We have a picture coming up. As a matter of fact, would you take the next slide? This is the bottom of the horse and how it's connected. You got that round plate there connected right to the wood on the horse, and then you have your
that connects the horse to the pole as it goes up and down. So
it also carries your stirrups where you're putting your feet, and that's something that I check. I check to make sure that larger bolt and nut is not loosening up, and you should every once in a while check those screws underneath to make sure it's all part of the maintenance. You should. These are antiques, and you know, if we're to preserve these things, you can't let them just start rocking back and forth, and the first thing you know, you're cracking wood. So a regular maintenance is important. And let me just say that here that we're very fortunate here. We have a board of directors that is really dedicated to preserving this carousel and maintaining it. And you know, it always starts from the top. So, you know, like I said, we're so fortunate to have this board that really, really wants us to keep this maintained, and they want it maintained. So that's so important to have people that are above you, basically, that want this done, that wants this preserved. And like I says, you know, they're antiques and they take a little more maintenance than a new modern machine. So next slide, I'm getting on a rabbit trail there. Okay, now we have what's called a love tub on ours. It's a tub that spins around, and it's showing a grease fitting there, but the fitting is way in underneath there, the bearing.
So you have to climb between the bottom of the tub,
yeah, and
into the center pole that supports it, which is far longer than any of us. You got to breathe, turn sideways, inhale and try, or exhale so you're thin enough to get in there. So a couple of years ago when the tub was out because there was a bearing issue, we got semi-smart and put a hose and a fitting right at the very edge of the tub. So now it can be routinely greased from the outside with far less effort because we're getting too old for this stuff.
Yeah,
Next.
there's very little clearance under there.
Yeah.
And again, you can look at that bearing and you can see if it's greased enough by the grease that comes out of the bearing. It's not a sealed bearing. None of these bearings are sealed bearings. So when you grease them, you can actually you can see grease come out. I know about how much it uses, so I usually do not do that because it just creates more grease on the outside, and eventually that's, so I know over time here approximately how much that it really needs. And most of your maintenance guys that are working on these, they got a very good idea just by looking at things on what it needs. And I'm sure Bill knows exactly what I'm talking about there.
Yeah.
So
Next.
Next, please. Okay, this is the difference between Bill's and ours. This has all been modernized. We have the original motor and the old wood. It was a wood brake on ours, and I don't know if that's what Bill had on his. I was going to ask him that question, but
if you look in the upper left corner, you can see parts of what was the original motor. 1906, signed by George Westinghouse. Part of the problem
16.
is part of it's 25 cycle, and we don't have 25 cycle current anymore. So we had to convert the motor and the transmission unit to a newer system so we can power the machine.
So you can see on this, we have a new motor and gearbox, and then it comes into the old system. You see the handle on the left-hand bottom corner. That was part of the old original brake system. And we've left that there just to show people that it's there. But other than that, after it comes off of what's silver, that's the new motor and gearbox. It comes into what was original. That's the drive gears underneath it. And that takes it up to those large pole or large gear that you've seen earlier. So this is the very bottom drive part. Next slide, please. This is looking underneath again. Bill showed you that. This is nothing but your ring and pinion gear and what it looks like from the floor looking up. That again, that is all hand greased. There's no fittings or anything on the gears. Next slide. Okay, this shows a grease cap also. On the bottom part of this, you'll see a bearing right there. There are 3 grease caps on this for ours. We have, so that, like I said, Bill's was showing you about the grease caps. This is original, 1916. And so what that is that's just a cap with a thread on it. And you have a little post coming out of there with a thread on it. And when it needs grease, you just turn that in a little bit, and it forces the grease into the bearing. Now, when it gets empty, you just unscrew that cap, you fill it with grease, put it back on, and then, you know, every time I come in, I give it 1/8 of a turn. You know, I don't wait for it. I just a little bit each time, and that way, you don't want it running around or running off on the ground, but it's just a little bit. But that's what close up and how a grease cap works. Next, please.
There's the side of our carousel. When it was down 5 years ago, among other things, our local power company was trying to help us save money, and they were trying to make less generations. So all of the lights on the carousel were converted to LEDs. They're the same size, same shape, same everything, but they're LEDs. One of the things we've learned, next slide, the LEDs last far longer, but even they periodically go bad. And we've learned when we change them all 589 of them, we clean them, but periodically we'll go through, and that's one of the sockets, clean the socket out. We found if the lights tend to flash, it's because they've been screwed in so long, and the vibration, that little clip in the center of socket gets pushed in, and then it vibrates and it doesn't touch the bulb. So we've learned to go in, clean, if they flash, go in, clean the socket out, pull that little tip back, and then put the bulb back in, and it works. Next slide. Ron talked about maintenance. All of the books that we have for all of our old equipment say, do this daily, do this weekly, do this hourly, do this monthly, whatever. The problem is they assume that they run 10 hours a day because they're at a county fair or whatever. Ours does not. I was able to find, this is actually a monitor for a sump pump, but it tells on the top line hours and the bottom is cycles. So when this picture was taken, this monitor was put in February of 2020. So when this picture was taken, the Carousel had run 223.49, 223 and a half hours, and it had run 44,456 cycles. Ron and I normally work Monday and Friday. So when we come in, the first thing I do is check the hours, and we have a monitor sheet next to the Carousels. So I can tell them, hey, since Monday it ran an hour and a half, it put 30 cycles on it. When Ron knows, well, when it's run 8 or 10 hours, that's time to do this grease cap, or that's time to do this grease fitting. When it's run 300 times, then we need to look at this, this, and this. So this has been a tremendous help to us in trying to being able to maintain our machine. Next.
Can you hang on just one second? I don't necessarily go by time. This is a great tool to have to give me information. I go by sight more than because of weather. It's cold, it's warm. I may cycle it 5 times for 30 seconds when I'm running it or working on it. So sometimes the cycles in time are not true. In other words, each time it's cycled does not have to be 3 minutes. So some of those get
but it's a good major help on a normal day for running. Next, the famous toolbox. That's where all the stuff is hidden. Next, the one thing that Ron has done is set up a notebook. And if anybody touches our carousel for any reason, notes are taken. So we know exactly what's done. One of the pages in there is my monitor sheet to copy. Next sheet. Yeah. There's Ron's notes. So you can see that on 10/8/21, you can see what he did and he signed. On 10/18, you can see what he did and signed. If I change bulbs, any maintenance, any lubrication, anything that we do gets put in the book. So we all know exactly who did what at what time. Next slide, please. This is the monitoring system. The box on the left is the power for the control power for the carousel. The box on the right is the control power for all the lighting. You can see when we work up on top, there's lockouts, so that we lock those 2 boxes off. So if anybody's on top of the carousel, somebody can't come in and start it while we're up there, or turn the lights on while we're up there cleaning those contacts. The box to the left that you can just barely see is an electronic timer unit that was put in probably about the time the motor was changed over. So all our operators have to do, bless you, Bill, for all the work you guys do running yours, because all our operators got to do is make sure everybody's on. We ring a little bell to warn people, and they push a start button. The machine winds itself up, does its 3-minute ride, winds itself down. There's a little clocking mechanism on the side that we can monitor, so we know where it is in its cycle. But our operators don't have to work with brakes or anything else. Next slide. And you're back to our machine. So Marissa, you somewhere there?
Yep,
Yes.
I'm right here.
Okay, we will, like Bill, if anybody has any questions, we'll try to answer if it's within our pay grade.
Of course, and thank you, Ron and Dean. So I'm going to start asking some questions. We have one that just came in the chat. Is there documents or a book that discusses how to put a carousel together, the parts and care or maintenance?
Is there a book that tells how to put them together? Is that the question?
Yes.
Not that I know of. I'm currently working on a book myself about the Balboa Park here. So all the photos you just saw are from the book, but it does show how they work, doesn't it? So yeah, look for it in a few months. Maybe it'll come out. And are you aware of anything, Ron and Dean, any books that that'd be cool if there was?
All the parts, numbers.
Ron says we have an original book that shows all the parts and numbers, and there's a set of directions on a poster on the wall in our roundhouse that tells you how to put it together in 18 steps. Right.
No. Yeah, we have a whole book on our whole carousel in the office, and I have not read through it as to how to put it together, but all the drawings are there.
All right, so look forward to Bill's book coming out to get a more modern version, or you can contact the Carousel Museum and learn some more about the archives and the original version of it. All right.
Could I ask Bill a question?
Yes, you can.
Bill, your oil, is it thin or thick?
It's thin oil, the oil that we put on top of the
Yes,
center pole. Yeah,
fairly thin.
it's a thin oil. Yeah, it's
Okay.
I can't think of the exact grade offhand, but yeah, it's pretty thin.
And the one thing I was interested in, you did say that your brake is wood.
Not the brake, not there's a drum. The clutch is wood. The clutch is a circle, and if you were to, I've changed the wood in the clutch a couple of times now in the years I've been there. You take it apart, and there's compartments that go all the way around in a circle, and they're filled with wood. This is the clutch I'm referring to.
Okay.
And I think that's just to help to make sure the pressure's even. There's 3 arms that go into that clutch when you're putting the clutch together, and those arms, the pressure has to be equal. If they're not, if one arm's taking too much of the load, it's going to snap and it has to be re-welded. So the wood, I think, is just to make another safety to make sure everything's even there. The brake itself, it's just a drum, like probably like an automobile. I'm not too familiar with automobiles, but you saw it's a drum, and then there's a sleeve that goes around the drum. And as you pull on the brake lever, it tightens that sleeve around. It's a metal drum, though. It's not wood. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
All right, next question. What did each of you do for work before you worked on carousels? Seems like there's so much knowledge and ingenuity and a lot of creative thinking to keep these rolling.
Well, I've been working at the Carousel since I was 16. So I started in 1972. I've been there 49 years. So I think I just got my knowledge over time. Yeah, everything's handed down. In fact, the knowledge at the Balboa Park Carousel, like I said, I've been with the Carousel 49 years. There was this gentleman, Clarence Wilkin, who was there for almost that long as well. So between us, we cover most of the life of the Carousel. There was a gentleman in between us, a guy named Monty, who only worked there 10 years. He was just a newbie compared to Clarence and I. But then there was the owner who brought it over. So it was really handed off from the owner to Clarence, from Clarence to Monty to me. So the knowledge is only passed off 3 times. So I'm fairly confident when I'm following our maintenance schedule, I'm doing it the same way that Herschell Stillman meant for it to be done. That's a great idea, Ron and Dean, the way you write everything down. I've really got to do that. So I'm learning things today too. So, but as far as doing anything before, I had a paper. I sold newspapers before that when I was in elementary school. But that's about it. How about you, Ron and Dean? Do you have any other jobs that got you into this field here?
I spent 38 years teaching middle school science. Didn't bother me a bit. Working with 10 and 11-year-olds. My dad was a diesel mechanic and taught it at one of the vocational schools in Buffalo, New York for 20 some years until they made him an assistant superintendent for vocational. And Dad got clean hands when I became old enough to hold tools. So I learned to do that. And I work with our local Habitat for Humanity crew. And those guys have taught me a lot too. Plus the fact that folks that we work here, like Ron, has taught me immensely amount of things about how to work on this carousel. So it's just been a blessing.
I was maintenance in an auto factory, and I've been around gears, pulleys, bearings, repairing stuff pretty much my whole life. So when I came here, none of this was a surprise. It's just the age of it, and so it didn't take a whole long time for me to get to know the machine. So yeah, I was maintenance my whole life. So that's kind of it.
All right, thank you. For Ron and Dean, how often do you have to grease the kiddie carousel? So for those of you unfamiliar with the museum, we do have a kiddie carousel for kids under 42 inches to ride. And is greasing it similar to the 1916 carousel, or is it more difficult to do?
Well, it's a lot smaller, and it is built different.
And it's
But
newer.
it's newer, but the principle is still the same. You have bearings, you have gears, you got a motor. And I don't care how you put that in order, it's still the same thing. And so it's a little harder because it's hard to get up on top of it. There is no grease fittings for the bearings up on top. So in a couple of years, I'm going to be too old to do it, I think. But yeah,
We need
it's
some
small.
help.
You got to get up on top of there, and it's all hand done. Now, part of it is oil. So you put oil down in a couple of those bearings where it's practically metal on metal. I mean, it's a brutal machine. And then it's all hand greased on top. And then underneath we have a couple Zerk fittings, but they're different. The work is work. I mean, a grease gun's a grease gun. Oil is oil. A gear is a gear. So, and how often? Because of its size and the way it's made, it doesn't take as many hours to maintain it. And when I say that, first of all, I want to maintain that big one really good. And it's not that we don't overlook the little one, but it just doesn't take as much. There's nowhere near the amount of weight on it. There's nowhere near the speed on it. The motors are smaller, so everything is downsized. So it just doesn't take as much.
Yeah, and it probably isn't used as much either. So the maintenance can be spread out a little further.
All right. You are in two different climates. Does that affect your maintenance schedules, Bill, or do you experience any unique challenges being in San Diego?
Well, most of the year, the only thing that it really affects is our band organ. We still have the original military band organ, and it's all leather. So about 3 months out of the year, they're called Santa Anas. It's a dry wind coming in from the desert, coming in from the east. And those 3 months, October, November, December, the organ doesn't work quite as well. So leather kind of shrinks back. But as far as the carousel itself, the weather really doesn't affect it. The only thing I can think of is our band organ that gets affected a little those 3 months out of the year. The rest of the year, it sounds great. It's like a Jekyll and Hyde. The rest of the year, it sounds amazing. But those Santa Ana months, it doesn't sound quite as good. But yeah, the only thing the weather affects for us is our band organ. The carousel doesn't matter.
Well, our weather in the Buffalo area is we have all 4 seasons. So inside of our roundhouse, we have a humidifier and a dehumidifier, depending what season it is. And the only other thing we have is we have a heater that comes from on top down. So in the wintertime, we have a chariot seat and a love tub. And so when we stop our carousel in the wintertime, we want to stop it we want to stop the love tub or the chariot seat underneath that heater, so we don't have the heat coming down on them wooden horses. It just, you know, if you leave for the weekend, you got it heat on it and then it cools off, heat on it. So that's the only unique thing that I think that we have is, you know, you have the season changes, like Bill said, humidity is always a problem, but then the heat on the wood, you don't want that stuff expanding and contracting. That starts causing your cracks. And so other than that,
in the wintertime, we try to keep the heat within about high low between about within 5 or 10 degrees. So when we're open to the public and there's people in the wintertime, we try to keep the roundhouse up around 68-ish. And then when we close, we'll let it go down to maybe 60, but we try to keep so there aren't the huge changes in the heat, because as Ron said, you get that happening, then you got, you know, wood cracking and animals cracking and things like that.
I just will add that we have 2 band organs in ours, and we can play either one of them. So that's another reason, like Bill said, is you got to maintain them too. So,
and we have a master organ master who takes care of all of that stuff.
Not me.
No, I know enough to change the rolls and clean the filters, but pretty much Doug takes care of everything, and he is a veritable genius. Go ahead, Marissa.
All right, for Bill, does your carousel still have a brass ring arm, and is there any maintenance involved with it?
Yeah, we still have the brass ring arm. We still play it the same way they did. Not much maintenance. It does take a lot of abuse. People who sometimes miss the ring and they hit the arm instead. But no, the arm, it's the original arm. It's the original arm from 1910, and they made things well. You know, the sheet metal did get cracked over there, so we did have to, now that I think of it, we did have to replace some of the sheet metal on it. But with that exception, it's still the same arm. It still works great. And yeah, you'll have to come to San Diego. There's very few carousels that, I think there's supposedly a dozen, but when I went on this convention, we saw a carousel in Elmira, Eldridge Park, I think, and they played the brass ring game, but there were no iron rings. It was very frustrating for all of us. We were grabbing, and then when they felt like it, they'd put in a brass ring. So somebody did get a brass ring, but we still played the brass ring game with iron rings that you can throw it at a dummy. You know, in fact, people, well, like I said, I've been there since 1972, but early on, older people would tell me that during World War II, our dummy resembled Hitler, and you could throw your iron rings at Hitler and try and knock him over. Because the iron rings are no good, so throwing them at the dummy gives you something to do with them. But if you caught the brass ring, you don't throw the brass ring, you get a free ride. So that's, we still have to answer your question. We did have to do some maintenance on. We'd have to replace some of the sheet metal that goes down the length of the arm. But with that exception, it's still the same arm from 1910.
Wonderful. For Ron and Dean, is the toolbox original to the shop?
I have no idea. It was here when I got here, and we just keep tools in it, and it looks close to original, but we have no idea.
Yeah, the reason for that is we keep the tools that we need just to maintain it, so we don't have to keep going back to a shop, and it just makes it easy.
There's most of what's in there are rags, the notebook, the grease guns, a couple of wrenches, a couple of screwdrivers. If we have serious work to do, the museum, we have a full workshop with all the power tools and saws and the big stuff. We'll go get tools. That's just mainly the short stuff to keep us from having to run to the other end of the museum to get to the shop.
All right, and what do you consider is the most important thing to take care of on your carousel?
Well, I already think I said it's that I think it's that main bearing that holds up the entire carousel. I mean, it's got to be those rollers are just it boggles the mind. We think how strong those rollers got to be to hold up the entire carousel. So I would, if I were gonna recommend anything to maintenance people, and like Ron Deed said, that bearing at the bottom there, both those bearings are so important because they'd be so hard to get to if you had to change it. When we had to change our main bearing at the top, it was a 2-week job, man. We had to be shut down for a weekend. We lost a weekend of revenue, and because that's a lot of labor involved in taking all those cables down and taking the bearing and getting it fixed and taking it back. So yeah, it was a lot of work. I would say take care of those two main bearings, the one at the top of the center pole and the one at the bottom that Ron and Dean spoke of. If I were gonna say anything, just take care of those bearings there.
I couldn't say it any better.
Perfect. What kind of grease do you use?
Well, we used a grease that was recommended by this carousel expert that I mentioned, Dan Hornberger. But it does in the summer when it's hot, it does give off fumes. So I talked to Doug Baffey about that green grease, and he recommends that. I'm actually trying a different kind of grease. It's a green also, but it says it's environmentally friendly, made from vegetable oil or something like that. And I'm just going to try it and see if it's not as doesn't give off as many fumes. I'm concerned that it may not stick as well. It seems very slippery. So we don't want it flying off the gears, as Ron and Dean mentioned. So may have to stick with what Dan Hornberger recommended, because it does stick to the gears very well, like Ron and Dean's grease does.
You mentioned the name there, Doug Bethke. He's the gentleman that took me on the very top and showed me what to do.
A very nice guy. Like I say, he helped us with our armored horse restoration.
Yeah, he's very knowledgeable too. He's a great guy.
Yeah. I also met Doug Hirschberger, who I'm sure is that organ genius you're referring to.
The organ guy.
Okay. Yeah.
The thing is about our band organ, we still have the original paper rolls, and they're also from 1910. So a lot of them are deteriorating. Now I know the museum has a working Wurlitzer perforator, which makes the rolls. And I know, Doug, that a few years ago they acquired an Acme perforator, which makes rolls for our organ. There were 5, as you probably know, there were 5 competing band organ companies back then. Wurlitzer, and the company that makes our organ is North Tonawanda Musical Instrument Works. So even though they have a working Wurlitzer perforator, those rolls are not compatible with our organ. But they have an Acme perforator, and I keep Doug is working on it, but maybe can bug him to work a little faster, because we need those new paper rolls. We have 102, so we have quite a few that are still playable, but we could use some new ones. So Doug Hirschberger, if you're listening, please work on that Acme perforator. Thank you.
The Acme perforator, of which he mentions, we acquired about 4 years ago in about 8 or 10 boxes. They'd been stored in a barn somewhere, and we had to pick the hay and the grass and parts out of it, and there are no books. So we've kind of looked at the functioning Wurlitzer perforator that we have and tried to mix and match and figure out how to put parts together. Doug has done it all. We're hopefully, when we're down this winter, we're hoping to get the time to go, and hopefully within the next 6 to 8 months, we'll have that Acme running, and we'll be able to cut you some rolls, Bill.
Outstanding.
We'll be in touch.
All right.
We're going to put a shot of that grease on one more time, Logan.
Yeah, the one that says the green grease picture. If you can find it. There we go.
Just in case anybody wants to see, that's what a tube of it looks like. You can get that in a 5-gallon pail too. As a matter of fact, I'm just kind of finishing up on a 5-gallon pail of it. But this is what a tube that'll go inside your grease gun looks like. So it's just a waterproof green grease. And
yeah, the website is greengrease.net. All the green grease, all one word. You can buy it locally, like we've got Home Depot, and I'm sure Napa or someplace else. You can also go to greengrease.net and order it in either tubes or our problem with the guns is trying to just load them, and it got messy. So we've gone to the tubes, but we found that this is really good stuff. It doesn't smell, and it sticks very well. And it's environment friendly and whatever else. So thanks, Logan.
Okay.
All right, for Bill, what year did you restore your armored horse?
This was just very recently. It took about a year. Well, I have a restoration team and we meet every Tuesday. So I could say it took a year, but actually we meet once a week. So, but this was just a couple of years ago that we did that. And thanks again, Doug Baffey, for letting me photograph that illustrated catalog. That really helped us. We referred to that quite a bit.
And how much usage does each of your carousels get?
Well, in the summer, we're open every day. We're open anytime kids are out of school. So in non-summer months, we're open weekends and holidays, and we go from 11 to 5:30 when we're open. So every day in the summer and weekends and holidays during the non-summer months. How about you guys at the museum there? What's the usage?
It's hard to tell because the monitor went in during COVID. And of course, that was just a whole disaster in itself. I'm guessing probably we were somewhere in the 20, 25 hours. The museum was normally open from 10 to 3 in the summer, 7 days a week. And the carousel probably ran pretty close to most of that. We close basically from Christmas till the 1st of April. Which gives us time to do maintenance. We're not exactly famous. The weather is not terribly nice. But if you were to call and say, I've got a group and we'd like to have a tour and there's 20 of us, we'll open just for you. But yeah, I'd guess probably 25 to 30 hours a week. Pre-COVID, right now, we're probably 10 to 15.
All right. Now, I'm not seeing really any more questions rolling in. So to wrap it up, will you each tell us about your organization?
Okay, well, the Carousel is owned by a nonprofit organization called Forever Balboa Park. Balboa Park is a huge park. The Carousel is just one part of it. I don't know how many acres it is, but it's giant. And this organization does a lot of good for the park. They're going to be working on a wooden, a botanical building, restoring it. So it's a really good nonprofit organization that does a lot of good for Balboa Park, and they own the Carousel.
So you're on for us.
I'm on for us. Okay. So the Herschell Carrousel Factory Museum is the only carousel museum located in the original factory. We're located in North Tonawanda, New York, so just a little bit outside of Buffalo, but be sure to come visit us if you're headed our way. And as Dean said, we're open about April 1st through Christmas. And we were started by a very dedicated group. Have still be a big part of our team and a part of our board. Does that sound good, Dean and Ron?
Yes. Yep.
All right. So
we also have 4 kiddie rides in an outside area, fenced in area. We have the Herschell helicopters, the pony carts, the Herschell boat rides, and the cars. And those are open in the summer. We open those usually early May, and they're only open like weekends till the kids are out. And then from June, when the schools are closed, from June to the end of August, they're running every day. We're open, they're open. So we maintain those too. But we didn't talk about those because we're just talking about carousels tonight. Stay here once around is never enough.
All right, so that's gonna be our last question. We're gonna wrap it up. Thank you so much to Bill and Ron and Dean for presenting tonight, and to everyone who decided to come in and listen to our first Carousel Chat. We're going to be having a couple more within the next coming year. So in a few months, we're going to be having a Wurlitzer one about our band organs, and then we're hoping to do a restoration one. All right, and thank you so much, everybody. Have a great night.
Nice meeting you, Bill.
Nice to meet you,
Nice
Bill.
meeting you, Ryan Dean.